In the dim hospital corridor, the officer froze as his K9 partner, usually calm, controlled, unshakable, suddenly erupted into a frenzy beside the silent, paralyzed little girl. His claws scraped the floor, his chest heaved, and his eyes locked onto something none of them could see. Every hair on his body rose as he shoved himself between the child and the empty space near her bed, trembling with a fear the officer had never witnessed in him before. Nurses rushed in. Alarms flickered, and the dog's growl deepened into something primal and urgent. Whatever he sensed was close, too close, and the real question hung in the air like a warning. What had terrified a police dog trained to fear nothing? The girl's world had grown small long before the danger arrived, shrinking to the quiet rooms of her home, and the measured routines that filled her days after the accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. But through every moment beside her was the one creature who never treated her like she was broken, a 3-year-old German Shepherd Police K9 named Rocco, assigned to her father's unit but bonded fiercely, almost spiritually, to her. Their mornings always began the same, her father leaving early for shift, her mother preparing breakfast, and Rocco settling at the foot of her wheelchair, as if guarding a throne made of vulnerability and stubborn hope. He watched every tremor of her fingers, every shift in her breathing, studying her with the hyper-focused devotion only working dogs possess, yet softening the moment she looked at him with a fragile smile. Their bond grew out of quiet rituals, gentle grooming sessions where she brushed his thick coat with determined little strokes, slow backyard rides with her chair while he paced beside her like a silent escort, and the warm weight of his head resting on her lap during long afternoons when she struggled with the loneliness her parents never saw. But in the final days before everything shattered, subtle changes crept into their peaceful routine, threads of unease woven into the edges of their life. It began with Rocco waking at night, pacing the hallway with his ears pinned forward, emitting low, uncertain huffs toward the girl's closed bedroom door. Then came the moments where he would suddenly rise from a calm rest, muscles tightening, eyes fixed on her with a strange intensity as if listening to something nobody else could hear inside the house or, worse, within her. Her mother brushed it off as restless energy. Her father assumed Rocco was reacting to job stress, but the girl felt it in her chest, an unspoken warning settling in the air between them. On one quiet afternoon, while sunlight stretched long and warm across the floor, Rocco froze beside her wheelchair, hackles rising as though a silent threat drifted beneath the calm surface of the home. Something in his instinct had shifted, deep and primal, as if he sensed a danger that didn't walk on two legs, didn't crawl on four, but pulsed quietly and invisibly. Danger he was preparing to face alone if he had to. And with every passing day, his protective shadow grew heavier, more urgent, hinting that the peaceful life they knew was already beginning to crack. In the days that followed, the house seemed to shift under a weight no one could quite name. But Rex felt it first. Felt it in the stillness before dawn, in the way the air pressed too heavily against the windows, in the faint tremors beneath the floorboards that no one else noticed. The paralyzed girl, Emma, spent her mornings near the sunlit window, where she loved to watch birds gather along the fence line. But even the birds were acting different now, lifting their wings only halfway before darting off, as though fleeing from something unseen. Rex stayed closer to her than ever, barely taking his eyes off her for a single breath, his tall shepherd frame held taut with the quiet readiness of a soldier on the verge of battle. At first the family dismissed it as simple protectiveness, admiring the loyalty that seemed to deepen every day. But as Emma's wheelchair rolled from room to room, Rex's behavior became too sharp, too focused, too urgent to ignore. His ears pinned at sounds no one else heard. His hackles rose at corners of the room where nothing moved. Sometimes he planted himself between Emma and an empty hallway as though blocking something from reaching her. Once, when a small framed photograph on the shelf tipped ever so slightly on its own, Rex lunged forward with a low growl, staring at the still air with a warning that sent chills down the father's spine. More than once he stood beside Emma's wheelchair in the middle of the night, panting hard, listening to something in the walls or beyond the backyard fence, something that made his posture rigid and his chest rise and fall with heavy, unsettled breaths. The tension grew thicker when Emma began waking with a strange trembling in her hands, something she could not explain, something she could barely feel but somehow sensed deep beneath her skin. Doctors dismissed it as a stress response, but Rex refused to leave her side even long enough for a routine check. He watched every doorway, every window, every shadow, as if convinced danger would strike from the smallest crack. One evening, while the officer was reviewing body cam footage from a recent shift, he noticed Rex pacing behind Emma in slow, anxious circles as though trying to herd her away from the doorway. That same night, as rain hammered against the roof and lightning crawled across the sky in jagged white scars, Rex suddenly froze at the back door, his whole body locking into a trembling stillness that radiated pure alarm. Without warning, he barked with a violence the family had never heard from him. Raw, guttural, a sound pulled from the deepest primitive corners of instinct. And the lights flickered, just as Emma whispered that she felt something watching her. The officer rushed to the window but saw only sheets of rain, yet Rex refused to budge, snarling into the storm as if aware of a shape hidden behind the darkness. The next morning, muddy tracks appeared near the edge of the yard, oddly spaced, uneven, as though someone had staggered through while trying not to be seen. The officer followed the trail a few feet before it vanished abruptly, as though the figure had been swallowed by the ground itself. That same afternoon, the house fell into a cold silence so sharp it made even normal sounds seem wrong. Emma's breathing became shallow, her face pale as she said she felt pressure building behind her ribs. Something tight, something urgent, while Rex began pacing the hallway with frantic determination, checking rooms in rapid loops before returning to her side with rising desperation. Just before sunset, while Emma was alone in the living room and the officer was finishing a phone call, a soft creak whispered from the attic door above the staircase. So small it could have been dismissed, yet Rex reacted as if a gunshot had detonated overhead. He bolted across the room, claws scraping against the floor as he launched himself toward Emma, ramming his body against her wheelchair and pushing it back several inches, his breath quickening, his muscles trembling with a fear so fierce it bordered on terror. Then came another sound, barely audible, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet, a dragging shift in the attic, a weight shifting slowly across old wooden beams. The officer sprinted toward the stairs, but Rex beat him to the base, barking with a ferocity that made the walls vibrate. And just as the officer reached for the attic string, Emma gasped, clutching her chest as her breathing hitched. Rex spun toward her, emitting a deep, guttural whine that sounded like a warning and a plea all at once. Something was coming. Something Rex had sensed for days, something invisible, but deadly, closing in around the girl he had sworn himself to. And as the attic door groaned open all on its own, the temperature dropped, the house seemed to exhale a cold breath, and Rex stepped forward with a trembling but unbreakable resolve. Whatever waited above them was no longer hiding, and Emma, paralyzed, fragile, unaware of the true danger tightening around her, was at the center of it. The officer's hand paused on the stair rail as Rex growled low, teeth bared toward the darkness gathering above, and the sinking dread in the room made one truth painfully clear: the dog wasn't just protecting her from something outside. Something inside the house was getting closer. The question was not whether Rex could stop it, but whether he would reach her in time. The storm hit its peak just as the officer lost sight of the trail, the world shrinking into a swirl of wind, whipped leaves and choking darkness, and yet the police dog did not hesitate, dragging himself forward with a desperation that went beyond instinct, pulling the stretcher, bound paralyzed girl toward a truth only he understood, his body trembling, his breath ragged, his ears pinned flat as if every sense inside him was screaming that they were running out of time. And then, in a flash of lightning, the real danger revealed itself. An old, half-collapsed hunting pit hidden beneath the mud mere inches from where the officer had been about to step, its rotted wooden covering straining and sagging, ready to swallow them whole, and the dog, driven by a force the officer had never seen in any animal, threw his entire weight sideways into the stretcher, knocking it from the collapsing ground just as the earth gave way with a thunderous crack, sending the officer tumbling backward while the dog clawed and fought to anchor the girl against the slick, sliding earth. The beast-like roar of the collapsing pit drowning everything except the frantic scrape of the dog's nails and his desperate determination not to let her disappear into the darkness. The officer, breathless and shaking, scrambled forward, realizing with dawning horror that the dog hadn't just sensed the pit. He had sensed something moving inside it, something alive and waiting in the hollow beneath them. A starvation, thin predator trapped below and thrashing at the sudden noise, its guttural growls rising from the newly opened void. And with one last violent heave, the dog pushed the girl fully into the officer's arms, just as a skeletal, mud-coated creature lunged upward, its claws slicing through the ground where the stretcher had been a second earlier. The officer fell back, clutching the girl, staring at the dog who stood defiantly between them and the snapping jaws emerging from the darkness. His fur raised, his stance unwavering, his entire body declaring that nothing, not storms, not pits, not monsters, would touch his girl. And as another bolt of lightning cut open the sky, the officer realized with chilling clarity that the dog had known all along. Danger wasn't coming, it was already there, and it had been waiting beneath their feet. The aftermath unfolded under the harsh wash of ambulance lights and trembling breaths as the paralyzed girl was lifted gently from the place where terror had nearly swallowed her whole. The officer's pulse still racing while his K-9 partner stayed pressed against her side, as if refusing to let even a second pass without watching her chest rise and fall, and in the blur of frantic EMT hands, whispered urgency and stunned onlookers. The truth began settling like dust after an explosion. The dog had been right all along, his instincts cutting through the quiet danger that no adult had sensed, his frantic barking the only warning before the hidden medical crisis deepened into life, threatening collapse. And as the girl was rushed into the emergency vehicle, the officer climbed in with her, letting the heroic dog leap up beside them, because after what had just happened, nothing in the world could convince him to separate them. Not when the girl's small fingers, weak and trembling, had somehow found the dog's fur and clung to it like a terrified child clings to the one thing that feels safe. And the hospital became a place of heavy pacing and breathless waiting as doctors worked to stabilize her, revealing that a sudden, silent complication had triggered a cascade of internal distress that she could not communicate. A crisis that would have gone unnoticed until it was too late if not for the dog's violent panic. And when the officer was finally allowed into the recovery room, he found his partner already lying beside her bed, chest rising and falling in sync with hers, as if he had been holding his breath for hours, and the girl's family stood nearby shaken to their core, kept upright by gratitude so overwhelming that it felt like grief. Grief for what almost happened, gratitude for what didn't, and awe for the animal whose instincts had pierced the impenetrable silence of danger. As hours passed and color slowly returned to the girl's face, her eyes fluttered open long enough to rest on the dog, and though she couldn't speak, the small softening of her expression seemed to pour warmth into the sterile room, pulling tears from her parents and a quiet, exhausted exhale from the officer who had known this dog through storms, violence, and chaos, but had never seen him fight so desperately for someone so fragile. In the days that followed, the dog visited her regularly, each time climbing gently onto the bed and curling beside her motionless legs like a guardian planting himself at the gates of the one life he refused to let slip away. And with each visit the tension in her parents loosened, their gratitude deepening into a bond with the officer and his K-9 partner that felt almost like family, as though surviving something so thinly balanced between life and loss had reshaped every connection around them. And when the news spread, first through whispers in the hospital hallways, then through local reports, then through people who simply needed a reminder that loyalty still held power in a world that often forgot its own humanity. The story of a dog who sensed what no one else could became something larger than a moment of danger. It became a promise of what love looks like when it is wordless, instinctive, and fierce beyond reason. And as the officer finally walked his partner out of the hospital one quiet evening, watching the dog glance back toward the girl's window as though memorizing her silhouette, he felt a pride so deep it nearly hurt, because he understood that heroism wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it lived in the trembling urgency of a dog refusing to let a child slip into the dark, and in that echoing silence he realized that their bond, dog to child, dog to officer, human to hope, had woven itself into something permanent, something that would long outlive the fear of that day. And in the end the message became clear through the girl's slow recovery, the family's unending gratitude, and the dog's unwavering devotion. True loyalty doesn't ask for permission. It simply acts, fierce and unafraid, in the moments when it's needed most, reminding us that sometimes the smallest heartbeat is protected by the bravest soul.